Good afternoon, everyone. It's Friday. It's past midday, so I hope you all stay in a warm place in the UK. It's quite cold. My name is Katharina De Vita, and I'm Associate Professor in Creativity and Innovation. And I'm really delighted to give today's webinar, and we will be talking about embracing generative AI in innovation management education. Now, first things first, let me say I'm not an expert in generative AI. So what I will be doing today is reflecting on my own teaching practice. And I'm also very curious to hear about your experiences. I try to make this webinar quite interactive, so you have a chance to contribute through the chat or in breakout rooms later today. I'm also part of the Teaching, Coaching, Innovation Special Interest Group of ISPIM, and I'm really happy to kick off this webinar, and we'll have further webinars from our Special Interest Group later in January. Let me introduce our agenda, a very ambitious agenda. I want to paint a little bit of the picture and give a bit of context around the higher education sector and generative AI. It has been a really hot topic during the last 12 months or so, and I'm sure you've been attending probably numerous workshops, seminars, talks on the topic. So I hope I can give a different spin to the topic today by sharing my own experience. And I will position my experience at the University of Greenwich and provide that particular context. I will be introducing the AI risk measure scale, which is a tool that we developed in Greenwich to actually reflect on our assessment strategy. And finally, I will talk about generative AI in specifically the innovation management education context, and hopefully we have some time for questions and answers at the end. So let me start off by discussing a little bit about higher education sector, and having colleagues here is an ideal opportunity to actually understand what your university approach is to using generative AI. So we know there has been a big debate around whether it should be banned, it should be embraced, or potentially your university doesn't have a position at this very point. So I would be very curious and encourage you to use the chat to give it a number. And often these things are not black or white, but in this case, the option that closely associates with your university approach to the use of generative AI. Is it one, an undefined position, potentially you can make local decisions? Or is it two, that you ban generative AI in an educational context? Or is it three, where your university maybe embraces generative AI and maybe encourages students to leverage it for assignments, projects, supporting their learning? Okay, so I see the number of threes are coming through the chat. Very interesting. And I see if we have any other positions coming through as well. Okay, we have a one. Okay, another three. Interesting. So let me say, this is a very recent article, which I think makes this topic particularly interesting and relevant. So less than half of the top universities publish AI guidelines. So Marisa, you make reference to a one. Your university is actually not the only one that hasn't positioned themselves really in terms of AI guidelines. And that, of course, also brings out the questions around whether it should be a defensive approach or embracing it. What are the consequences of maybe not publishing any guidelines? We can see that there have been a number of articles published on that topic. And the big question here is really, is it a threat or is it an opportunity? And it can be seen in, I guess, both regards. It can be seen as a threat. There has been a discussion around academic integrity. And it can be seen as an opportunity. And you see many of these articles highlighting that we need to think about authentic assessments as a way forward. We need to rethink the purpose of our assessments and the skills that graduates now require, and how we can support them in that journey. Because one thing is that we know already, students are using generative AI. One article that summarizes this quite well is published by CAPS this year. And that article is making these points indeed, talking about embracing AI, but also the shift in thinking and approaches that this would require. So we have to think about the skills that we develop and assess in our students, and how these have to change, and how we can create authentic assessments to actually address the threat to academic integrity in terms of students utilizing it in a way that is not responsible. So I believe, reading and experiencing this topic now for a year or so, the question isn't really, should we embrace generative AI? It is much more about the question, how do we best embrace generative AI? And I will give an example, as I said, in context of the University of Greenwich and how we are positioned in terms of generative AI. On the one hand, we're supporting staff in embracing it, and on the other, also our students, because that's really the foundation in order to be able to embrace it. So we had to make changes to our university assessment misconduct policy on the use of generative AI. So we've worked this very explicitly into the policy and what our expectations are. And that means students have to make reference to AI if they use it as part of their assessment. We also ask students to complete a declaration of AI use as part of their assessment when they submit it. And these are just some of the examples, but we give students, of course, also guidance when it comes to how they can use it effectively. What is prompt engineering? So there have been video content, written material. We've developed an e-learning module that talks about academic integrity, and also a number of in-person workshops for our students. And now we're hiring academic integrity champions so that there's a bit of peer education taking place at the same time. Now, equipping students is only one side that is important. We also need to think about how can we strategically approach this topic and actually move towards authentic assessments so that we can fully embrace generative AI. And as a university, we have organized a number of training, seminars, and events. And that started way before the whole wave of ChatGPT and so forth came along. We have dedicated assessment days where we discuss the future of our assessments and how we can be creative and innovative in the way we assess our students. We discuss topics and have external speakers at our learning and teaching festivals each year. This year in particular, we also took an approach that we involved external examiners and prompted them to think really critically about the assessments that we prepare and ask them to comment on their appropriateness in light of the developments in generative AI. And one tool that we've given staff to actually think about their assessments in much more depth is the AI risk measure scale, or in short, ARMS. And this is what I will be talking about during the next couple of minutes to give you a bit of an introduction to what ARMS is all about. Instead of me talking, let AI do the talking. So I will show you now a video that we've shared with our program leaders that introduces the ARMS and how they can utilize it. So it's just a very short 2-minute clip. So bear with me as my colleague Anna is going to talk you through ARMS.
Hello, I'm Anna, your AI avatar. I am an example of what AI can do to support teaching and learning, for example, enhancing presentations. However, as we know, AI is also prompting us to reflect on the design of our assessments. I'd like to introduce you to ARMS, the AI risk measure scale developed by the University of Greenwich. The ARMS is a tool for categorizing assessment tasks into 5 levels, ranging from very low risk to very high risk. Its purpose is to assist module and program leaders in evaluating assessment tasks, providing diagnostic insights, identifying best practices, and encouraging teaching teams to carefully consider assessments that may pose a higher risk of academic misconduct, especially now that we are all embracing generative AI. Let me guide you through how the ARMS works. Firstly, the program leader assigns a risk level to all assessments within the program. If the program leader is well versed in the assessments, this can be done without further consultation. However, if needed, the program leader can also collaborate with module leaders to categorize assessments into the appropriate risk levels. After all assessments have been classified using the ARMS, the next step is to identify good practices which are rated as 1 or 2. We also need to focus on high-risk assessments, rated as 4 or 5, that require targeted interventions. This dual focus is essential because it allows us to share good practices while also reviewing and enhancing assessments to ensure they remain fit for the future, fostering a culture of learning and upholding academic standards. Use ARMS to keep AI at arm's length.
Okay, so to summarize, we see 5 different categories, and those assessments that have been falling into category 1 or 2, so rated as very low or low, we considered those assessments in many cases as good practices that we wanted our program leaders to share with others as a source of inspiration. If an assessment has been categorized as 3, we said there was no action involved. It's something to keep an eye on, but nothing that really concerned us at this very point in time. If it was categorized as a 4 or 5, we suggested there had to be a review of assessments to rethink if that assessment could be converted into something more authentic, that could have involved a different type of assessment or just a different nature of the way the question is maybe put to students. So that's in essence our diagnostic tool. It is not the solution, or it's not proposing a solution, but it's a reference point that allows as a measure of diagnostic and problem identification. So essentially it's about reflecting, rating, and reviewing. As colleagues, we reflect through this tool on the approach to assessment and think about whether it's fit for purpose in light of these developments in AI. We rate it because it gives us a shared language, which can then help us to discuss our assessments with colleagues. And we also then review those cases where we feel we need to intervene and change and improve perhaps our assessment design, or those cases that are considered good practice that we want to disseminate much more widely to make colleagues aware of some of the good work that is taking place. Now, we've run this as a pilot initially across different programs, the BA International Business, the MA International Events Management, and our Executive MBA, to try to understand how do these different assessment items perform on a program level. And I'm going to give you first an overview. So we see here the BA International Business, which has 56 assessment items across levels 0 to 6. And we have for the MA International Events Management, 12 items at level 7, because it's only a level 7 program. And the Executive MBA has also 12 assessment items. So you can see in blue, we have those assessment items that are categorized as 1, very low. And then green was a 2, and 3 was in yellow highlighted. And then those where we wanted to have some intervention were the 4s and 5s. So in international business, that represented 20% of the assessments on that program, for example. So let me go one level deeper into that data. Here is the example of BA International Business. So we see exams, tests, presentations, posters, project plans, and so forth. They're all rated as 1, which probably is not surprise to you, because it's very difficult for a student to use generative AI if it's an in-person exam or a live presentation or a poster that they have to create and maybe talk about. Now, if we look at portfolios, essays, reports, the picture starts to look slightly different, and we see a much wider spread of the ARMS ratings, ranging in some cases from 1 to 5. So there is something about the nature of that assessment, not so much about the type. So it has to be something about the design of that particular assessment. We can see essays, reports really spreading across the different categories. So it doesn't mean to conclude that it's the type of the assessment that is an issue, but it's the design of the assessment that could potentially be an issue. And I will give you a bit of an example later on in context of innovation management. So what I would like to do now is, if you are going to break out into a breakout room, I want you to reflect on your own assessment, or maybe a colleague's assessment if you don't lead your own module, and think about using the ARMS. And we have a document here in the chat that you can open, which is the ARMS summarized in a PDF. Rate your own assessment. Where would you put that from 1 to 5? And then discuss in your group where you've rated your assessment and whether you agree with each other on the rating. And we just do that for a couple of minutes. So you will disappear into a breakout room, and then we come back and have a quick discussion about your assessment. And I'm curious to hear whether you found it helpful, or maybe you have some suggestion for further improvement. So I'll let you go into your group and discuss this for about 10 minutes so you can have a good oversight of what you are doing in your different modules assessments. Lucia, is it correct that everyone is in a breakout room, or have I been kicked out of a session?
No, they are in breakout rooms, but
Okay.
someone in the room too, someone left, so there's basically only one person there.
If you want to assign that person maybe to the other group, I think that'd be fine. I just want to have give people a bit of time, a few minutes. We don't even need to do exactly 10 to just reflect on their own assessment.
So basically now there's everyone in the same room.
Yeah, I think that's fine. And I can maybe, or we can have them come back here and we discuss together. That's fine as well, because we're not that many people.
Yeah, and I don't know who exactly, but they left from the room too.
Okay. Well, then we can get people back into the main room, because I couldn't see how many we were.
Do you want me to close it?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Hi, sorry, my internet just broke down, so I have to come back. Sorry.
Don't worry, I had that problem earlier today.
So I think I was in breakout session 2, and then once I've tried to get there, everything collapsed.
Yeah, I think people are coming back to the main room.
Okay, that's fine.
Yes.
That's fine then. Yeah,
Okay.
sorry about that.
That's fine. So we're all back in the main room. I didn't see how many groups we were. So essentially we're one big group, in which case I'm opening up the floor to you and share with me and with everyone essentially maybe what your own modules like. Do you rate it anywhere from 1 to 5? Does it fit on the scale?
Yeah, as from my point of view, so it really depends. So I'm involved in several models, and I think it really depends on the program, the model, and but I think it's a really wonderful tool. So we work not so systematically, and I think it's really a super tool for reflecting and just structuring these decisions a little bit. Yeah.
That's interesting. Do you have a particular module or assessment in mind, and where would you place that?
I have a lot in my mind. I just have to think about what is a kind of a good example. In most of my models, it's really easy for students to use AI, and I really decided to make a combination to just really open it for AI, and they have to declare how they use it and when, and just refer to AI. And group works especially, and then I combine it very often too with oral exams, and I invite students to oral exams, online exams, for example, like 10-15 minutes per student, and I combine this group work that is mostly based also or includes AI as a tool and source for academic text writing reflections. So I combine it very often with individual exam forms, more personal exam forms, so that I have really kind of 50-50 ratio.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Okay, so a combination. How's that for you, Saskia? Are you using assessments that would fit somewhere on the scale?
Yeah, I was actually surprised when I just saw your results that you kind of said presentations are not vulnerable for using AI. And my experience just semester has been a little bit different. Because there are excellent AI tools that can give you great presentations, maybe not on a deep level, but to get like the substance and for like a starting point for the presentation that makes, not only building presentations, but also with the content. I mean, not just the outside of that's my content, just put it in a presentation, but if you ask the AI and they come up even with a great design of slides, I was actually quite surprised because some students told me that they use that tool. And I agree that because if you have a live presentation with questions, you can fairly easy try to evaluate if people have done it by themselves, because you can ask deeper questions and then kind of you get a feeling if they well, at least if they have an understanding of it. If they have done it by themselves, I don't think you can actually measure that. So I would think whenever, and that's what Stephanie just said, whenever you have like a personal contact with the students in terms of when you add on some kind of oral exam, that definitely helps. But I've come to the point this semester, I have some people who are very into IT solutions who have enough resources to have bought GPT-4, so they have access, even better access than I have. I think that's one of the problems that we have in our institutions, that our students sometimes just, we could all buy it by ourselves, our colleagues, but we don't have a license for our university yet, so we are on that yet. But there's quite a considerable amount of students that have licenses, and they are so fast in learning how to apply them. So that's more, I think we kind of sometimes think that is a low or moderate risk
Yeah.
for some of the examinations, but it's actually not. So I don't really, you know, I also see that whenever you have them, either you put them back into the written exams, what you have done, like, I don't know, 20 years ago, we only do written exams, which from a teaching point would be a disaster from my point of view if we go back to that. And I've seen universities doing that, and we just go back to written exams and put them all in the room, get away from all the technical equipment. Or we try to find other ways of communicating, which is hard in a large group. So I don't really have a good solution for that yet. And I go with on the same path as Stephanie. I'm kind of like having a mixture of different kinds of exams that I kind of put together.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you made a very good point also, again, about the type of assessment. So it's not necessarily that, you know, all presentations could be considered a 1 or a 2. Maybe some presentations could be a 5. In this case, it was summarized under presentation, but the review had been taken place in light of the task that students had been given. And we also have to appreciate that the technology is evolving. So this mapping was done beginning of summer, end of spring. So maybe some of these assessments will now change as well, because the technology is advancing quite quickly, and so are the skills of the users. And you probably have experienced this as well, that students very often know already many more tools that we're aware of. They know how to navigate them quite proficiently. So it's quite important to keep that in mind. And I will come back to the point about what type of assessment versus what type of task might be rated as a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. But yeah, very, very interesting to hear about the different approaches. And the point you've also made reminded me to highlight the role of marking criteria. I think we have to also not just think about the design of our assessments, but what are the aspects that we're really marking? Are we now marking the design of something that might be generative AI produced and that are beautiful slides? Or are we just focusing on how complex information is explained to the audience? What are the communication skills? What are the underlying sources that inform that presentation? So quite a lot of things, I believe, that are shifting, that are now up for discussion again. And I don't know if there's anyone else that wants to come in to share a bit about their assessment. I don't see any virtual hands. I just take that as a sign to just move on and unpack this topic a little bit further. So I believe before we can embrace generative AI, we need to brace ourselves. And to do that, we need to look at our assessments. And their essays and then their essays. So it's not just about the type of assessment that we're using, but it's about how it's designed. And I'm giving you one example here from innovation management. So I took over a module that in 2020 had a task that suggested a theoretical essay should be written on the topic. The innovation theorist, Professor Christopher Freeman, is noted for his observation that in the current business environment, firms must innovate or die. Discuss your understanding of this idea. So that was the task that was part of this module, an essay. Now this has changed. But how would you have rated this essay if you were to apply the arms? You can put it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself. We're quite a small group, so feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to share.
Yeah, 5.
5, okay. I see some nodding. All right. I'll show you how this essay is now. It's still an essay, but now we're asking students to watch and analyze an episode of The Apprentice. And in that very episode, they will experience a team that has a failed attempt to create a new product or service. And we're asking them to apply the theories, models, and approaches that they learn as part of this innovation module to discuss which type of innovation they observe, to explain the causes for the failure, and then ultimately recommend actions to the team to manage the innovation process better. Any suggestions? Same question. How would you rate this assignment using the arms?
Three.
Okay, we have a 3. We're in the chat says 2 or 1. Okay, so let's say on the lower end, it seems. This is how I've rated the essay. I would have given it a 5, so I think we're pretty much on the same page. This is an essay that maybe what was working well in 2020, but just doesn't work very well in light of students using generative AI. The essay, and this is not my rating, this is the rating the program leaders have given to this assignment, and they said this would be a 2. The reason is students can use generative AI, absolutely, and that's fine, they can use it, but it's more about the criticality, the application of theories. It's not just how they articulate their arguments to answer an essay questions. It's much more the interpretation of the task and the application, and also the creativity they apply in recommending actions. So it has shifted, but the assessment type itself remained an essay. And this is the breakdown, and I go quite quickly over this because I've shared this in a previous session, why this task is something that I believe is still quite suitable, despite not being a live project, not being an exam, and not being a presentation, which would be the more go-to options for many people trying to rethink an essay. It has principles of authentic learning that is quite embedded in the task, because they watch an episode, they see a team interacting. Yes, it's not them interacting as part of this team, but it has some principles of authentic learning that is embedded. Now, in our context, we have several hundreds of students that are taking this module. So we also have to think about scale. And this is a task that would be suitable for small and large modules. When we say making reference to theories, models, approaches covered, we link practice and theory, or at least we focus on the application of theory to a more realistic scenario. And then finally, we give students also a bit of choice, which makes, again, all the sessions that they study as part of this module relevant. And every assessment looks unique and different and is kind of tailored to the preferences of the student as well. So now that we have an assessment that we feel we can still use despite generative AI being around, now we can embrace generative AI. I would like to hear from you. How do you, or how could you, use generative AI in innovation management education? Do you use it perhaps in course management and student support? There are plenty of tools that can do that. Do you use it in your teaching or support in the way students learn? Do you have a way maybe of using generative AI in terms of marking assessments or providing feedback? And again, there are a number of tools around that allow us now to make use of this and speed up some of these processes. Or are there any other areas? And I have a Padlet prepared. Since we're a quite small group, I think we can just have a direct interaction, and I would be quite curious to hear, do you have any ideas or experiences across these different areas in using generative AI? Neda, have
Our
you?
students,
Yeah.
our students use generative AI for developing business plans, digital business innovation ideas, connect different trends with business models. Yeah, I think for several group work, especially in class, but also as group work in parallel, they use a lot of generative AI to as a kind of structuring, pre-structuring their work, and then finally they, of course, they add theories, methods, etc. from textbooks and journal articles. But I think for the very beginning of structuring texts and find a kind of appropriate logic, they use a lot. Yeah.
Okay. So to support their learning, how about marking? Have you been able to utilize it for marking or for session planning?
Yes, we do that too. Yeah. So
Any particular tools?
Yeah. What kind of tools we use? Mostly so tools like ChatGPT and other tools. I think most of them are text-based, and yeah.
Okay, that's great, fantastic. And Mariana, do you want to unmute yourself and explain how you've been using that for quizzes and formative tests?
Yeah, there's also actually feedback that I've gotten from students. I've created, so my module is about project management, and halfway through the module, I do a revision session of everything that we've done. But I do that, it's a lecture, and I do that lecture, I use a Menti with questions, and I make comments on whether it's right or wrong, the answer that they've got. But one, it makes easier to do a revision session, but two, it also helps me gauge how well students remember the topic or how well they understood the topic, and allows me to spend more or less time on whatever question they got right or wrong. But after that particular session, I've got a surprising number of students asking for more quizzes and tests that could be used to as a revision tool for the content. So I obviously creating quizzes can be very time consuming, and coming up with the wrong answers is actually the hardest part of it. But I found that ChatGPT is actually very good to provide wrong answers. So if you have the question and you ask GPT to generate, for example, 3 or 4 wrong alternatives as the answer, it's very good to do that. And I've tested it to even create an entire quiz. I had to adjust a few things. Some questions are way too easy or way too difficult for the level of the students, or questions that sometimes don't cover the topic that I have discussed in the module. But generally speaking, it was so much faster than it would have otherwise. And because of our platform that we use, which is Moodle, I can actually see how many students are doing it, how they complete, how they're engaging with it. And my module is very large, just shy of 500 students, and I got about anything between 7 and 9% of students engaging with that, which sounds very little, but when you have 500 students, it's almost 50 of them engaging with it, which is actually a good number. For me, for first year students, which tends to be less engaged with this kind of independent learning. So I take it as a win, to be honest, and it made my life a lot easier to create those things, and students are actually engaging with it to a certain extent. So yeah.
Great. No, I think that's fantastic. And there are also plenty of tools that can help with these type of things, where you input, for example, a text, and you ask to create critical questions, provide sample answers. But it's also a way of maybe consolidating and organizing data. Let's say you are listening to a presentation and you would like to give feedback, but feedback in a structured way. You just take your notes, you write a good prompt that can allow the data to be organized in a way that the student can actually differentiate between, shortcomings that are linked to the contents, to the delivery, perhaps to the sources that are being used, and maybe also in a way where you can signpost students in a much more personalized way how they can develop some of the skills through some of the support services as well. Of course, there are tools that you can use to give or to do some marking. Aside from tests, there are also a lot of softwares out there that now look at text, and it's being developed at a really rapid pace. But the example that I wanted to provide today is also something that I've been using in the classroom. And that's what I call the innovation challenge. And again, I'm talking about a module that is quite large. And I want to give students an experience where they can still interact within a lecture, where they have an opportunity to learn from each other, but that technology is used as a supportive tool and not as a way of isolating them from others, either from myself as a tutor or from their peers. So in the first step, what I'm doing is I get students into small groups, maybe a team of 4 to 5. And I ask them to brainstorm innovative ideas for a product, service, or maybe a business model within a particular industry. So they work in small teams, they think about different ideas, they utilize the kind of tools and knowledge from the entire module. So they've been doing this towards the end of their module. And in a second step, this is when generative AI comes into play. They're asked to articulate their idea in a couple of 100 words and then submit that concise idea to ChatGPT. And the reason I'm using ChatGPT is because it's one of the most well-known generative AI tools. It's very accessible and intuitive, and it is just the platform that is used by our students the most. So I feel it makes it really accessible to them for exploration. And then they get feedback. They get feedback from ChatGPT about their business idea. And I asked them to use very particular prompts in this case to seek, for example, insights on the feasibility, on the impact and uniqueness. And then we talk about it, because the human element, in my opinion, is really important here. They get AI generated feedback, yes, and I'm also asking them to refine their ideas based on that feedback, but they have to be quite critical in selecting what feedback is appropriate. And in some cases, you might believe students suggest or have a tendency to believe that all the feedback is really valuable, but actually I had some points raised by students where they said actually the feedback is not very valuable. And when I asked them to read it out to me, I said actually it is, because the feedback says your idea was not clear enough to make a judgment about feasibility, impact, uniqueness. You need to refine and provide much more detail in order to get valuable feedback out from the tool. So critical evaluation is really important, but also the involvement of the tutor in terms of guiding that discussion and the selection of feedback that is appropriate in that very context. And then finally, again, the human element, we showcase the work that they've been doing. So they prepare presentations, they showcase their innovation, and then the class can vote on the most innovative idea. And we give them criteria like feasibility, impact, uniqueness, but also their presentation skills. Because one thing that I believe is really important in that context is that we build up the skills that are required for them to succeed in their future careers. And that is very important. We can see one report here highlighted how this has changed over time. And just to highlight one aspect, for example, planning. Planning used to be a skill, a human skill that was asked for in 2012 in many job ads, but it has completely changed when we look at 2021. So this has completely reverted, and I think it's quite obvious. There are a lot of tools that can do planning extremely well, but then there are elements like teamwork, collaboration, communication skills, problem solving that probably are becoming even more important, regardless of which kind of technology we have, because we still have to be able to communicate complex information and make it accessible to others. So for me, it was really an exercise where we can build up skills that are relevant. And when we talk about innovation, I think we have to focus on also the innovation itself, talking about things like ChatGPT as an innovation, mastering it. They will be using that in their future workplace. And if we can also combine it with technology, so technology integration in the way we teach, it might make the class also a bit more engaging. So to me, I just want to conclude on this final point before we have a bit of time for questions and discussions as well. In context of teaching and learning in particular, to me, something to keep in mind is always the digital divide. So generative AI can, of course, make things easier and give access to students to tools that can help them develop project ideas, that can help them structure an essay, that can be helpful in terms of grammar and language. But it can also mean that it might widen the learning gap for those that don't have access to particular tools, which again is also something to keep in mind when choosing particular platforms and tools for exercises. Students know, in my opinion, quite well what quality and biases are attached to some of the responses and contents that we can generate through generative AI. But I think it's really important to keep reminding students of this. And this is also where the human element and the criticality comes into play, something that I believe we need to develop much more now that we have access to vast amounts of data and use them in our day-to-day teaching and work. So the big question really is, how will the evolving landscape of technology and industry shape the skill sets that are required for our future graduates, and how can we best prepare them for this type of demand from industry? Big questions. I'm sure the answers to that will evolve as the technology does, but to me, similar to the exercise that I've just shared with you, it's about the kind of skills that we focus on that make human interaction, again, really important and a central point of how we send them into the workforce. Right, so we have 10 minutes for questions or further discussions, and I appreciate you've been using this in your own teaching context, so I'd be very curious to see how that resonates with you. Neda, you're also doing some teaching at Greenwich.
Yes, hi, Katharina.
What is your experience? Do you feel that students are quite familiar and are using it? Do they wish to have more of that guidance?
I guess, it's good actually for tutors to being exposed to these scales ahead of like the marking period, especially with the modules that they have to come up with a big assignment, and like most part of the work is like assignment and not the examination. So I think based on what you just presented, maybe like something like the scale development can be like work upon like based on the modules, if like they're lab based or like they are just basically essays. So we can work on that. And I heard from like some other like PhD students who are also teaching. For example, one of my friends who teaches in tourism and sustainability, he was like complaining that actually tutors are not well equipped with the tools to identify and like capture the plagiarism in the students' works, especially in this era of ChatGPT. So my experience is because it was a lab-based course, they didn't have the freedom to play with these tools, but some other people reach out to me and mention that I guess university needs to take actually a bigger step to make all the staff aware of these opportunities that can be used in a positive way, but on the other hand, like in assessment, it may like contradicts with university integrity rules.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting thoughts.
Thank you.
What are your views? Is it Sajjad? I don't know if I pronounced your name correctly. I don't know if you can hear me.
I guess he's on mute.
Yeah. So what are the next developments in your own modules? Are you moving towards different types of assessments? Are you embedding it much more in your teaching and learning practice? Or is the university having a particular agenda in terms of their position?
Should I answer that question, Katarina?
I think Saskia just unmuted herself because
That's
I'll
fine.
come back to you.
But Neda, go ahead if you want to. Oh, okay. I just want to say, I think one of the, for me personally, one of the main challenges is that I don't have unlimited access to the tools that maybe my students have access to. And yes, I could obviously invest it myself. Well, having said that, ChatGPT Plus is not available right now. So even if I wanted to, I can't right now. And the other thing is I have a couple of colleagues who are very engaged in that, but they spend a lot of time scanning. I mean, I have one colleague that does, she also is a leader of a competence center for AI in our university, or in the whole of Germany, what she's doing. But she says she spends at least 2 or 3 hours every day on just coming and figuring out what new tools and methods and what's going on. We don't have that time. So I wish I would, and you know, I'm very open to try out all this, but I know it takes the time. It takes the time for me to learn all these things. So I'm kind of like soaking everything in. But this is the same as if you would learn a language, or if you'd like to program, you have to apply it the minute that you hear it. So I've been going to all these offered possibilities to learn how to use these tools, and I've been talking to my colleagues who have used it, and some of the things I've tried and applied as well. But I'm kind of feeling breathless a little bit, to maybe say that might be the right word. So I know that there's great opportunities, and I would love to do all that, but I would need at least another day in the week to make it happen. And that's really is my biggest challenge right now. So we'll try, it's like, Mariana said, it's great for quizzes. We've tried that as well. By the way, if you use a certain kind of material, like if it's your own book or your own article, you can just pop it in and generate multiple choice questions out of it. And ChatGPT does that in, I don't know, a split second. So that's much quicker, obviously, if people would have done that. And then you can apply it into Moodle, or you can do games and all that stuff. But there's so much more that can be done. And I would love to explore all that. I'm just kind of like, I'm just kind of don't have a good plan how to approach it in a most efficient way for me, that I'm not kind of getting overstimulated, because I think that's what's happening right now. I'm just overstimulated. So, and sometimes overstimulation feels like being the rabbit in the light, not doing anything and just standing there and trying to complete and breathe. And I think lots of colleagues that I've talked about that are not so keen on using new technologies per se, even if it's not artificial intelligence, they kind of completely resign, and they will be overtaken by the students. Oh, they already are by far overtaken by the students. So, you know, figuring out my dilemma of learning, of how to keep up with the students, how do we prepare them to be prepared for the market, for the working place in a couple of years, although we don't know what's going on, is something that makes it, I think, kind of a challenge. So I don't really know how to handle this challenge right now. I try my best, but I don't know how well.
Absolutely, and I think that's a very good point, and good for us to recognize. And I think everyone has seen those big overviews on whether it's a website or LinkedIn, mapping all these different apps across different opportunities. But is it just about using a technology, or is it about using it in a meaningful way? And I think sometimes we have to go back to the pedagogy and think about, is that helping us do something faster, better, more accurately, or for what reason are we using it? Just because it's out there is not a good rationale. And I think that's why it's important to think about whether we develop through that the skills that we want our students to have. Do we do something that is more efficient or more clear, or helps and guides students, but not just for the sake of doing something because it exists? That's, at least from my point of view, always the question to come back to.
But may I just add a little thing? I've just had the discussion with my colleague who's a marketing professor, and he's very keen on artificial intelligence. And we've done design thinking workshops and all of this stuff together before. And he just showed me, and he has access to ChatGPT Plus, and he just showed me that he has developed like AI agents that kind of like help you to steer through the part. But he's also kind of developed, for example, personas. So he gave him all the information about the prompts, and kind of everything that we developed with a persona, he fed into an AI, so it was ChatGPT, and that gave us the possibilities. And that was actually something that I thought that's really a useful tool, was the possibility to try and test prototypes with the persona, because also all of a sudden, if you would talk to a person, because now the ChatGPT is the persona, because you've fed them all the information. So it's not a theoretical, well, it's still a theoretical concept, but it kind of feels as if you're talking to the right person. And you can do that so easily with multiple personas that you have. So this is something where I think we already integrate this into our classes, but this can be done even more. It's a little bit like when you said challenge your idea with ChatGPT and see how how valuable the business model is. I think we can use this to a much better extent. Also, like to generate data to try to figure out, and just you don't necessarily need like a case in terms of like a made-up case study with data, but you can actually generate a case study with ChatGPT if you know how to write the right prompts. So in this sense, I think that is solutions that help us with our teaching, where we can really make advantage of AI. So I think that, and I think to do that, it doesn't require you to be an expert in writing something. You have to be quite familiar as how to do the prompts. But that is something that is, I think, easily achievable and really adds additional value to our teaching. So I think I probably continue doing that. It's just the more advanced stuff that I think might also be valuable, but I haven't really figured that out.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'd love to see more of those use cases where we think about where is a good area of application, and the rationale behind it. So yes, if you plan to write up any of those practices, I'm very keen to see that. Nida, you also had your hand up. You wanted to share some thoughts.
I guess I just wanted to mention that when we were before high school, we didn't use Excel that much for like the school assignments, but there were like people who developed some modules and like code in Excel to be able to make it more complex and like a little bit more user friendly. So when you just see the backend, it's like actual coding and like developing modules, but at the surface, it's like an easy tool that, as you said, Katharina, it's out there. If we are able to write prompts in a way that it's beneficial for like both lecturers and students, I guess we can also like use it as a new opportunity. So it's not something that's always a threat. I guess it's also an opportunity maybe for marking, because I talked to some of like lecturers, they are like kind of like having a headache, because some of them, they hate markings because it takes much of time and energy. So if we can develop a tool, like, because I'm interested in cross-sectional research in different departments, computer science, business school, we can develop a tool like, and then university can, like, in the rule book says that, okay, all lecturers needs to actually correspond their markings with these scales. So I guess maybe this is like a beginning of a good thing that can be actually thought about.
Again, I think it's an area with a lot of potential, and we are probably in the first full academic year where colleagues are embracing this in various areas: teaching, learning, assessment, feedback, student support. And there is a lot to learn. So if anyone is planning to ever write down these cases of application, I think that would be a very practical contribution to the community, and maybe a call for us as a special interest group to think about. So thank you so much for the discussion. I very much enjoyed it. Clearly learned a lot from how you are working with generative AI. If you have any follow-up questions, I know you have the document already, the PDF, in case that is relevant, to bring it to your institution, to think about, you know, a common language of talking about assessment design. Feel free to use it. I'd be happy to hear how you're using it. But other than that, thanks for joining, and I hope you have a good weekend.
Thank you very much, Katarina.